Welcome to an SFB Addict video. SFB Addict here. So, on April the 11th, 2017, Windows will be terminating support for Windows Vista. So this means that you need to either upgrade to a more modern version of Windows or get something else. And one of those things that are something else is Linux. So how exactly do you, a Windows refugee, make the switch to Linux? Well, here are the basic steps of the migration. You need to run a backup and migrate users' data from the old operating system to the new operating system. So anything that you have on your computer, like pictures, videos, text files, music, that sort of stuff, you'll definitely want to take that with you to your new operating system, in addition to things like maybe saved emails. Okay, so once you've run your backup, you then need to select a distribution. And this in and of itself is a process with lots of decisions to make. And then once you've made that decision, you need to download the distribution or the ISO, and then there's some steps you have to do to make sure that you've got a good copy of that, verify the hash, and then you got to burn that ISO to a CD or put it on some sort of a USB stick. And then after that you need to do a test boot with the live CD or live USB version to just verify that it's what you want, that it'll work on your machine. And then you go through the actual installation process, and then you configure and install any missing drivers and do some basic troubleshooting to make sure everything's up and working right. And then you start installing the specific applications and software that you want on your computer. Now, there are some tips for this migration. When you're installing, try to have access to a second computer with a working internet connection. If you run into any problems during the installation, you can use this other computer to search for solutions. If your computer has a problem with Wi-Fi, for instance, you'll need to find out how to get that Wi-Fi working. If you encounter problems, don't forget to try the test installation media or test memory options that come with the installation disk. So if you've got bad RAM in your machine, that can lead to a bad install of the software on your machine. And once you've got all that done, just remember that using the same wallpaper on your new Linux installation might just make the psychological transition to Linux just a little bit easier from Windows. So now we come to the backup. Now, important things like backups can save you from losing all of your data. Things like your precious photos, your precious movies, your precious music. So even if you toast your machine, you'll be able to recover your data if you have a backup. If your backup software has a verify feature, use it. You'll want to back up to an external device if possible. Do not back up your data onto your existing C hard drive where Windows is. That is dumb. If you somehow delete your Windows installation during the installation of Linux, your backup will be deleted too. So moving things to an external drive, USB stick, or a cloud account is preferable. Now the thing is, you have to realize that the downloads, music, my pictures, and my videos collection directories may be very large if you have a lot of music and a lot of pictures and a lot of movies. So what is it exactly you're backing up? Well, you aren't going to be able to run Windows programs on Linux. Well, you can, but that's another story. You'll find out about wine later. So there's no need to back up those things, but you will want things like documents, pictures, movies, music. Unfortunately, some of these can be hard to find on Windows. Believe it or not, some of the older versions of Windows, where they stored things, wasn't exactly clear. So, things like emails, your browser profile, your bookmarks. Things on the desktop are actually located in this file location. C, Documents and Settings, your username, and then Desktop. Your favorites, things like bookmarks, are in C, Documents and Settings, username, Favorites. The My Documents folder is actually C, Documents and Settings, username, My Documents. Now things get a little bit more complex when it comes to email, because Microsoft likes to move things around from version to version. So if you follow this How to Geek link, it'll show you some of the places where you may need to look. And here's the page. So what is a PST file? Where are my PST and OST files saved? How can you move your PST files? So this will be an invaluable resource to you when you're trying to move email stuff. So contacts in the Outlook Express version are in C, Documents and Settings, username, Application Data, Microsoft, Address Book. And then the Outlook version of Outlook Express, the address book is contained in what is called a PST file. So there's a 2010 version. You click the File tab, Account Settings, Data tab, click an entry in that list, click the Open folder, location usually is C, username, app, data, local, Microsoft Outlook. In 2016 and 2013, it's C, users, username, documents, Outlook files. And then the emails themselves for Outlook Express are in C, Documents and Settings, username, local settings, application data, identities, usually a username, Microsoft Outlook Express, and that username might be a string of alphanumeric characters. Now the emails in Outlook 2003 are in C, Documents and Settings, username, application data, Microsoft Outlook. Isn't it fun when Microsoft moves things around from version to version? Now, getting things out of the PST file is another thing altogether than locating the PST file and putting it into a backup. A utility like read PST will be needed. For contacts or vCards, importing them one by one is simple, but when you're trying to do bulk imports of hundreds of them, that'll get really tedious doing it one by one. So you'll need to open a terminal in Linux after you get Linux installed and type in some commands that will do that exporting for you. And so these are the two commands that you'll be using. Cat space dot slash asterisk space greater than symbol space mycontacts.vcf, and then sed space -i space quotation single quote s/vcard begin /vcard other direction /n begin other direction /g end quote mycontacts.vcf. So this will create a mycontacts.vcf, and you then import that mycontacts.vcf into the particular program you are using, Thunderbird or Claws or something else. So this is a short list of a few programs. You should make a list of the programs that you use and the file types that result from those programs and confirm their location. Keep in mind, some Microsoft formats are proprietary and may not be able to be transferred to a Linux equivalent or alternative. Some can be, but sometimes the markup used is proprietary, so the content of a Word doc, for instance, may be there, but the spacing or the special columns might not be, or a particular font might be proprietary and a substitution might be made in the conversion process. Now, most people that are going to be doing this migration only have their own account, but if you're sharing this computer with multiple people, there might be multiple accounts. So each user on a Windows XP machine, for instance, has a separate profile. These are all stored in the C Documents and Setting directory. So ensure to copy the data for each profile on the system that you want to create on the new Linux system. Some subdirectories, example application data, may be hidden. To browse them, you need to first enable the Show Hidden Files and Folders option. And there's a link here to How to Geek on how to enable that on various versions. So, how to show your hidden files and folders in Windows 7, 8, or 10. And it walks you through how to do that for each version. So, after the backup, next comes selecting a distribution. Now, this is a graph, or graphic, of the various Linux distributions that are out there. And it's not a complete listing. But as you can see, things get very complicated very quickly. This is actually a timeline of Linux. So first we start with the Linux kernel and the GNU packages, and then people take that and they start making distributions, which takes the GNU and the Linux kernel, and then they add in software for the desktop environment, and then they start packaging it with various selections of software. So very quickly you get multiple distributions. So you have Debian, and then if you simply follow Debian along, then you get things like Corel or Axandros or Storm or LibreNet or Lindows or Linspire. And Guadalinux, Ubuntu, Kubuntu, Edubuntu, Xubuntu, Mepis, Simply Mepis. You get Knoppix, you get Morpix, Canotix, Damn Small Linux, Symphony OS. And that's just coming off of Debian. Because if you go down, then there's some that dead-ended, but then there's others that changed their names and became other things. Like here is Slackware, and from Slackware you get SUSE or OpenSUSE. You get Vector, you get Slacks, you get Frugalware, Sun Java desktop system. There's distributions here I've never even heard of. And then we get down here, we got Red Hat, Caldera, Connectiva, Mandrake, from which comes Mandriva and PC Linux OS, and a whole bunch of others. Now this graphic stops in 2006. There's been more splitting since then. But as you can see, choosing a distribution gets complicated pretty quickly. So sometimes it's easier just to look at a tree that only looks at one or two parts of it, kind of thing. But knowing the distributions that are out there by name really doesn't help you choose which one to go by, does it? Well, there are guides out there like this, which are yes-no questions that kind of take you through. So, have you got any experience with GNU Linux? Now, this is a fairly sarcastic graph. Why do you want to know so much about me? And then they point you to Tails or OpenBSD. They're distributions that are very big on privacy. Okay, do you have any experience? No. Okay. Or yes. So let's say no. Do you really want to change your operating system? Do you really want to leave Windows? Well, if no, then go to Windows 7 or use a VirtualBox or a live CD. If yes, does it need to look similar to Windows? Yes, use Mint or Zorin OS or PC Linux OS. If it doesn't have to look like Windows, try Ubuntu or Elementary OS, because they actually look more like an Amiga or a Mac. Okay, so have you got any experience with GNU Linux? And if you say yes, well, then it takes it down to how much. Are you beginner, intermediate, or advanced? Well, if you're a beginner, then it starts asking you, do you care about bloat? And if yes, then it takes you to Ubuntu Minimal. Now, what bloat means is a lot of applications pre-installed. And then it asks you a following question: can you follow instructions? No. You have an older computer? Puppy Linux. Is it a current gen computer? Is Ubuntu. Less bloat, Lubuntu or Crunchbang. So do you care about bloating and you're a beginner at using Linux? And then it says no. And then are you i337H4X0R? And that basically is asking, are you a hacker? Do you know what you're doing? If yes, backtrack. You're in the wrong area. You shouldn't be under beginner. So this little question here should take you basically straight to here. General purpose or specifically oriented distribution. And if you're in here for general purpose, use Ubuntu. If you're going in for something specifically oriented like science or CAD, then it recommends some specific operating systems. So let's backtrack a bit. So if we weren't a beginner, if we are intermediate, it then asks, do we care about freedom? Not necessarily. Do you want to compile packages from source? And if you say yes, try these ones. If you say no, then do you like minimalism? Yes. Do you need to be on the bleeding edge? Arch Linux. GUI on by default. TinyCore, Haiku, etc. And if you don't care about minimalism, do you care about ease of setup? Yes, Ubuntu or OpenSUSE. If you don't care about ease of setup, then you want bleeding edge or stability. And that leads you to further options of OpenSUSE, Cybon, Chakra, Fedora, or down to Debian or CentOS. And then, of course, if you come back here and you go to the branch that said you were an advanced user, does it have to be a Unix-like system? No. Well, React OS and Minuet OS are available. If it does have to be a Nix-like operating system, do you want it to be paid? If so, go to RHEL. Free, then you got other research-like or FOSS. Then you got Hackintoshes, Oracle, Solaris, Minix, etc. So this is just one example of a decision tree for trying to determine your operating system. But there are other ways of going about determining your operating system. You could, for instance, just simply follow the crowd. You can find out what the crowd is doing by going to distrowatch.com and taking a look at what are the major distributions. And the top 10 distributions are right here. Linux Mint, which is based on Ubuntu. There's Ubuntu, which is based on Debian, and then there's Debian. Interesting how those three are the top 3 and the top 10. And then there are other things here like Mageia, Fedora, OpenSUSE, or SUSE, Arch Linux, CentOS, PC Linux OS, Slackware. And then you're getting into FreeBSD. Well, then you get into asking questions. Well, what's the difference between Debian and Ubuntu? Well, the pros of Debian is it's very stable. Cons, it's conservative. Well, what about Ubuntu? Pros, it's a fixed release cycle. Cons, lacks compatibility with Debian. So let's take a look at the pros and cons of Mint. Superb collection of minty tools developed in-house. Cons, the alternate community editions aren't always included in the latest features. So what they mean by that is you've got Linux Mint Cinnamon, Linux Mint GNOME, Linux Mint KDE, Linux Mint XFCE. So for instance, Linux Mint 18.1 was out right away for the Cinnamon version, then you had to wait a couple weeks for the XFCE version, etc. So if you're using some of the community editions, is what they call them, you might have to wait a little bit longer for the latest release. Not that big of a deal. But the operating system, or the distribution, that has been made most popular by Windows refugees has been Linux Mint. Now, some of the other decisions that might determine your distribution choice are your CPU type. When downloading Linux, ensure to select the correct build for your CPU. Many distributions have separate downloads for 32-bit or 64-bit CPU architectures. They also may have downloads for non-x86 CPUs. So if you're migrating from Windows, you'll likely want an x86, 32, or 64-bit operating system distribution. Now you can poke your head around and look at lots of various different live CDs, download a bunch of ISOs, burn a bunch of them, and boot them up. Or you can just simply go to YouTube and type in the various distribution names and take a look at some of the reviews that are there. And you might want to take a look and see whether or not the distribution is pulling from stable repositories, or testing repositories, or unstable repositories. Now, some distributions have a rolling release and others have a reinstall in order to get the next newest version. Now, if you were going to go for an operating system or distribution that is a reinstall method, that will have choices or implications for how you choose your location for home. If you keep your home, which is where you keep your personal files like documents, movies, etc., if you keep that home inside the same partition as the operating system distribution, when you go to reinstall it, you'll be wiping out home. If you make home as a separate partition, when you go to reinstall the operating system, it's completely separate, so it'll be safe from that. Now, there is a website out here called the Distro Chooser, or Linux Distribution Chooser, where you take this little test and it kind of points you towards the distribution which might best suit you. So here, let's take a quick run of this. So, test of knowledge. I am good in computing and able to find solutions. Sometimes I need help from others. To find the correct Linux distribution, the test needs to know how you describe your skills with Linux. I'm not very experienced, and I might need help troubleshooting. I already used Linux a little bit. I am already experienced with Linux. is important to know which operating system. I've used Windows before, I was using Mac before, I've used Mac OS and Windows. I do not use Windows or Mac OS. It is important that it is beginner friendly. I'm fine with reading instructions. This is very important. I'll just let you read the questions. And what result did we get? Xubuntu, 94% recommendation. Lubuntu, 88%. And it just goes down and down and down and down. So, take the results for what it's worth. Now, of course, at this point you are probably asking, why are there so many distributions? Don't think of a distro as a different Linux, but instead as one Linux packaged with a unique collection of software. Things like desktop environments. One desktop environment might be GNOME, which is similar to a Mac or Amiga in style, while another might be KDE, which is similar to Windows, or Unity, which is like a tablet. They all use the GNU software and the Linux kernel. However, they all pull the same group of software repositories. And then we have some groupings here of various types of distributions, ones that are like Windows. So you got Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Kubuntu, Linux Lite, Linux Mint, PC, Linux OS. Now some people might say that none of these are like Windows, and some say that all of them are like Windows. It's an opinion kind of thing. And you have lightweight distributions suited for older or low-powered hardware. Lubuntu, Bunsen's Labs Linux, Bodhi Linux, and I would put anything that is an LXDE or an XFCE version in this category as well, or you can just go to DistroWatch and type in old computers category. Now there are some really different operating systems out there, and Linux comes in a lot of flavors. Some are set up to be as tiny as possible, and some even run entirely from RAM. Puppy Linux is one such Linux operating system. Puppy now comes in a variety of flavors and is more suited to machines that Windows 95 came on. Precise Puppy is the more original flavor. There is the link to get it, and it is a mere 201 megabytes in size. It uses very tiny programs you have never heard of and takes getting used to, but it's fully usable if you take the time to learn the programs. It uses SeaMonkey, for instance, as SeaMonkey is a browser, email client, HTML composer, and newsgroup client, all in one program. It's like Netscape used to be. That's part of how it stays so small. And because the entire thing is in RAM, it is lightning fast. You click on something to launch a program and it's there. There's no waiting. There are heavier versions for machines with Windows 98 or ME, and that would be the Lucid Puppy version. And again, there is the link for it. And the Puppy website, if you go to it, is a complete horror story. And that's puppylinux.org. And you might not be able to find what it is you're looking for there, but don't despair. You can always go straight to the forums, merga-linux.com/puppy, and you can ask questions in the forums, and they can point you directly to what you want, or they can just give you a simple link directly. So let's, at this point, assume that you've found your Linux distribution that you want. You need to download the ISO and burn it. If you don't have the ability to burn a distribution ISO to disk, or have a really slow internet connection, or your capacity is capped, you can have one sent to you through snail mail. Small little fee. Usually it's like $5. And that usually pays for the shipping of the disk, the cost of the disk, and the time spent for the person that burns the disk and sends it to you. Or even pick them up at a local computer shop. Some shops will quite happily have disks available for you, or they'd be willing to burn them for you for a small fee. Otherwise, you can download the ISO image yourself, and some of them are as small as 100 megabytes, and some of them are about 1.6 gigs. You'll need to have a CD or DVD burner in your machine and the software to run it, and if you want to, you can simply put the ISO on a USB stick. And there are tons of guides out there on how to do that. And here are the links. You can pause it and type them into another window if you want to look them up. And it's important that you do this once you've downloaded the ISO. Verify the hash of the ISO. If your download was corrupted and you burn that disk and then try and do the installation, it's going to crash on you or fail or not install everything, and things aren't going to work. This saves you time, trouble, and effort later. Verify the hash, and there's a link here for explaining how to do that. And of course, once you got the disk burned, before you run the installation, you can do a test boot off of that disk and try things out. It's pretty simple. You insert the distro ISO and use your BIOS settings selector to change to boot from that medium, and then you run it. Now, most distros have tools that can test your RAM to see if you got bad RAM. If you have bad RAM, that as well as a corrupted download will be a pain in the butt later. So you have to make sure that you've got a good ISO and that your RAM is good. Both of them are critical to installing software, especially an operating system. So now it comes to actually doing the installation. This is where things get complicated. There are several things to consider first. Dual boot, location of home, read the section below, and install the covered material later. And installing will be covered more later. I'm reading this off of something I typed up earlier. Anyway, so choose dual boot or Linux only. So dual booting, or sometimes called multi-booting, is a good way to experiment. If you want to keep your Windows installed, you can do that by using dual boot. So when you dual boot, when you boot up, there will be a menu and you simply select from the menu. Now this is a bit of a complex topic. So there's some links here on how to do dual booting. There's tons of videos on YouTube on how to do it. But it's pretty simple. Basically, you shrink the size of your partitions for window, freeing up space, and then you install Linux into that space, and then it creates the menu entries, etc. Now, if you do keep a no longer supported version of Windows, do not use it for the internet. Do not use it for mail. Do not use it for web browsing. Do not use it for chatting over things like Skype. it's not secure for the internet. You should disable the network card in that operating system so that you cannot get to the internet using that operating system anymore. You can keep it for playing games, but again, you shouldn't use it for going online to play those games. And of course, you can always just simply completely wipe out the current operating system and use the entire hard drive for Linux. And most people that initially set up dual booting usually end up going that route within a year or two afterwards. Now, all of this is assuming that you're going to be using something called grub2 in order to make the choice when you dual boot as to which operating system that you select. There is a different way of creating that menu. Instead of using grub2, you can actually use Windows. And inside Windows, you can use a program called EasyBCD to input an option for booting into Linux. And again, the process is similar. You have to shrink the size of Windows, create space for Linux, and then install Linux into that space, and then use the EasyBCD to create an entry telling Windows when you boot up that instead of wanting Windows, you want Linux. And there's a link here to a YouTube video on how to do it, and a link for an image that is mentioned in the video. But this is something that would be used for mostly more advanced users. But it is an option. Okay, so now you need to choose the location for home when you run the install. First, what is home? Well, again, we've said this earlier. Home is where you store your pictures, your docs, your movies, your music, your anything that you've created with various programs. So there are three options for home. You can choose home as its own partition, or even as its own hard drive, or you can make home be something that is inside the Linux partition. So what are the drawbacks, pros, and cons? Well, the drawback of separating home from the Linux install partition is that it is a little more complex to set up. The benefit is that the Linux OS partition can be wiped out and your files on home, a separate partition or a separate drive, are completely safe. Having home on its own drive means the entire drive the OS is installed on could die, and your files are perfectly safe on another drive. You just install a new drive, install an operating system, and you are back up and running. The drawback of home on its own drive is that the drive can die and you lose your home files. Of course, home files should always be backed up to the cloud or to another drive, so it should be easy to recover in the face of that kind of failure. Now, if you're using old equipment, and I'm assuming that if you're running Windows Vista, it is older equipment, you need to remember that hard drives have a life expectancy of about 3 years. That's pretty much what most companies will guarantee them for lifespan. Now, some hard drives might die within 3 months of use. Some hard drives might die 30 years later. It's just one of those things. So, if you're using a hard drive that's more than 5 years old, it takes your chances if you don't back stuff up. So, having all your documents and things in a partition called home makes it real easy to back that stuff up. You just copy the home folder onto another hard drive, or you put it on the cloud or a Dropbox or something like that. Or if you have another computer on your network, you can just take that folder and compress it and put it on another computer and save it there. Okay, so you've run the installation, you've got your home partition, you've got your installation of the operating system, you've set up your grub2, etc. So now it comes down to the software or the applications. So choose your apps or selecting installing software. Linux does not natively support Windows programs. Well, duh. So you'll need to find a workalike for each Windows application that you use. Some distros come with a collection of some of these on the install, but they can all be installed later from repositories or from their websites. So here are some websites that list equivalents. So the first link is Linux software equivalents for Windows software. And what it does is you look down under the Windows application. So Norton Ghost. Well, Linux equivalent would be Qt parted or G parted. Let's see. Outlook, Thunderbird, Lightning, and Sunbird. Contact, Balsa, Thunderbird, Lightning, and Sunbird. Word, OpenOffice Writer, Abby Word, K-Word, LaTeX, and LibreOffice Word. The complete Microsoft Office suite. Well, there's Kingsoft, currently called WPS. There's OpenOffice, there's KOffice, there's Calligra, SAGOffice, and of course LibreOffice. And this goes on and on and on and on. Every type of application that you think of, there is a Linux equivalent. So CorelDRAW, Adobe Illustrator, Inkscape. And it's not just one program. There are other programs. This is just whatever this person that created this page put in. So they're not aware of the 15 others, or they just decided to put the most popular one in. There are other programs. So that's the first such link. There's more guides. So software equivalents, introduction, open source alternatives, Linux alternative project. So let's look at the Linux alternative project. So again, it lists alternatives to Adobe Audition, Audacity, Adobe Illustrator, Inkscape, Microsoft Front Page, Aptana, Bluefish, Blue Griffin, NetMeeting, Ikiga. I don't even know what some of these programs are for Windows, so I'm just rolling down quickly for one I can recognize. Windows Movie Maker, CineFX, Cinelera, Kdenlive, Kino, Lives, Lombard, etc., etc. Remember, all of the software for Linux is free. Now, there are paid programs for Linux, but most of the stuff that you're going to find on these lists is free software. So again, there are other websites here that you can look at for those lists. And you can pause the page and copy-paste kind of thing, or type them in, whatever. Let's see. So, the primary apps that people will be concerned about are Internet Explorer. Well, you have Firefox, Chrome, and SeaMonkey. Microsoft Office, you got LibreOffice, KOffice. Outlook Express, you've got Thunderbird. Windows Media Player, you get VLC. For a paint program, you get Empty Paint and GIMP. Then you got Silverlight, and the equivalent is Pipelight. And let's see. Windows apps you can't do without. So, you can try something called Wine, or Wine is not an emulator. And it lets you run some Windows applications on Linux. However, not everything is going to work. Some things in Windows are proprietary and there just isn't an equivalent for yet. So you may be unable to run Outlook 2010 or 2013, but you might not be able to run Outlook 2017 or 2020, whatever version the current version is. But you can usually run an older version. Now, sometimes it's not just a matter of installing that particular piece of Windows software. Sometimes you have to install an additional piece of Windows software. So if you're trying to install a game, that game may need DirectX, and you may have to install DirectX. Or it may need C++, and you have to install C++, that sort of thing. And then, of course, some things, again, are proprietary to Windows, or to Microsoft, I should say. So there might be some Microsoft fonts that are proprietary. So if you wrote a document in Word with a particular font, when you take that document and you load it up in LibreOffice on Linux, it's not going to be able to use that font, so it'll substitute a font that it does have. So things might look a little different in terms of the size of the paragraphs, how many paragraphs and sentences fit on one page. So you may need to rejigger some stuff around and put it back into an acceptable order. You may have to change some font sizes, that sort of thing. But there's Wine, and you can also just put your Windows programs directly into a VirtualBox. So in VirtualBox you can install your whatever version of Windows you want, and then install your particular Windows software inside that and run it inside Linux. Now, there is older software that might run on DOS, old DOS games. Well, if you have DOS applications, you can try DOSBox or DOS Menu, and there are many other emulators out there. So you can run your old DOS games on Linux. And you can even run other things like MAME for arcade games. Or there's a Sony PlayStation emulator. You can run Sony games on Linux. And there's even a Nintendo emulator where you can run your old Nintendo games. So a lot of old stuff will run under Linux that won't run under Windows anymore. And that actually extends to hardware. Sometimes there's old hardware that the drivers were deliberately no longer supported under Windows because the companies wouldn't pay the extortion fee to have those drivers registered, that will run on Linux just fine. So we've mentioned repositories several times in this video so far. So what are they? Well, with Windows, you can search for software on the web and download a file and extract it to install it. In Linux, all the software is in one place called a repository. There are many repositories out there. Some of them are stable, some of them are testing, and some of them are unstable. So major repositories are designed to be malware-free. Some with really old software, some that are bleeding edge. And when we say break things, we mean things like dependencies. So one version of software might need another small piece of software to work. Say a program called Wallpaper uses another program called Silly Screen Colors, version 1. But Silly Screen Servers itself might be up to version 3, so you're not using version 3. And that's because if you had version 3, your program called Wallpaper wouldn't work. And if you installed it, it would install version 3, but by installing version 3 it would uninstall version 1. Now let's say you've got another program out there called Extreme Wallpapers that does require version 3. So if you try and install that program, which requires version 3 of Silly Screen Colors, your original wallpaper program doesn't work. That's what we mean by an incompatibility for dependencies, or breaking dependencies. When you're using from a stable repository, all of the applications that are in that repository should not conflict with one another in terms of dependencies. And if you do try and uninstall one or install another, it'll tell you if there is a problem with the dependencies. So it informs you that if you install this other program will stop working. That's what a stable repository is all about. When you go to unstable, it's the Wild West. Some things may break other things. So when you're choosing a distribution, what type of repository it pulls from is another thing that you might want to look into. Now, most Linux distributions use a stable version of the repositories, simply to avoid looking bad, because if somebody installs an unstable distribution and things start breaking, they start bitching, whining, moaning, complaining, and saying things like Linux sucks, when it's them that broke it because they didn't understand what they were doing. So when it comes to a repository, we also come to the software manager. In other words, how do you get that software from the repository? Well, each distribution has a chosen repository, and you can have different software programs to install from them. Debian systems use something called apt, where others like Fedora use something called RPM, or Red Hat uses Yum, or Arch uses Pacman. These are a collection of text commands that you can type into a terminal to install software. Now, most desktop distributions have a graphical user interface software manager like Synaptic, or their own custom GUI, that does those commands by a simple mouse click, so you don't have to type stuff in. Now, Mint's is called Mint Install. Now, each distribution has its own names for the repositories. Ubuntu has 4: main, universe, restricted, multiverse, as well as PPAs, or personal package archives. Now, packages that are in these personal archives do not undergo the same validation process as the main repositories. It's something kind of unique to Ubuntu. And Mint, because it's based on Ubuntu, also has the ability to use PPAs. So with Ubuntu, you got main, universe, restricted, multiverse. So you've got canonical supported free and open source for your main, and then you got community maintained free and open source for universe, and then you've got proprietary drivers for devices under restricted, and then you've got software restricted by copyright or other kind of legal issues that are in the multiverse. So the software is available to you when you specifically tell it to install, but it doesn't come with the download of the distribution for legal reasons. So that's what they mean by legal issues. So having a certain DVD burner software application might be illegal in the United States, but might be perfectly legal in Canada, the UK, and Europe, for instance. That's the kind of things that they mean for legal issues. Now, you can change your system to go from, for instance, a stable to a testing repo, or you can even use a mixed system pulling from stable and testing, but it's a little bit more complex to select that. But each distro will have a way to add those repositories or make those changes of sources. And it's usually just opening a window, typing in a password, and then selecting what you want. So here's a paragraph on how you install software on Linux Mint using their software. So let me actually open that up here for you since I'm using it. I accidentally clicked the pause button on my recorder once too many times and actually lost what I was trying to record here. But anyway, here is the software manager. So if we go into something like games, we can see that there are multiple categories across the top. And we can actually change the view from things that are available to things that are available and installed, or things that are just simply installed. And the game that I chose to install was YesNo. So it is now currently installed. But when you bring it up, there's a button here that you just click and say install. So if I bring up another game here, like Super Tux Kart, you can see there's an install button to install. It gives you some screenshots what the game is like, gives you description, version number, and then some ratings. And then you click install, which is what I did with YesNo. So now that I've recreated the part that I had accidentally deleted, let's go back to the original video. Okay, so we just finished the install. And you'll notice that there's now a little check mark here for installed. And the install button is changed to a remove button. So this is how you would uninstall software. And when you're doing your searches, you can look at stuff that's available only, or available and installed, or just installed. So if I go back to games, it's showing me the games I already have installed. If I undo the check mark, it shows me nothing. If I go back in and do available, it shows me what's available. And if I want to go down to a specific subcategory again, I just click it. Now it's showing me just these games that are under board games. So it works the same way with all of the categories. So if I want to look at Office, it shows me all of the Office software. If I want to look at sound and video, again, it shows me all the things under sound and video. So that's how software managers work. Now every distribution will have its own software manager, and you can have multiple software managers running. So this is one for free software, and you can install a software manager for paid software. Now this is a graphic user interface friendly one. Now there's other ones here called Synaptic, which is pretty common. And again, I got to put in my password. And this is what the Synaptic Package Manager looks like. So it's not as pretty to look at, but it does give you categories here on the left. So we want to look at emails or email programs. It then gives us a list of programs over on the right, which we can scroll through, or you can come up here and you can type in. So if I want to look for Thunderbird, just typing in THU shows me all the Thunderbirds. And these are all language versions over to the right. So if I were to click here, I can get a screenshot of it, and I can right-click on it. I can mark it for removal or installation, and then I can click on the Apply button, and it would install that software or uninstall the software, as the case may be. So that's it's still a graphic user interface, but it's slightly less graphical, and it's more common to a lot of different distributions. So even on Mint, I've got 2 software managers, or package managers. So that was the repositories and software and talking about installing. So after that, it comes to the point of actually installing. So there are 2 more hurdles. UEFI and Secure Boot. So newer machines have a feature which can prevent non-Windows operating systems from booting. You may need to disable Secure Boot in your BIOS if your hardware has this feature. And the other issue is drivers. So this can get tricky, especially for newer hardware. And if you have a problem with the driver, you can go to your different communities and post about asking for help. So one way to find out if you're going to have a problem with hardware is to use the live CD and try and test that hardware first. But this doesn't always work. For instance, for things like Wi-Fi, your live CD may use a proprietary piece of software in order to ensure that your Wi-Fi works during the testing of the distribution, but they're not legally allowed to install that driver because it's proprietary. So the one that you're using in testing may not be the one that gets installed on the system for legal reasons. Either that, or during the install process, the install process said that this other driver was supposedly a better match, but wasn't really, and you end up not being able to use your Wi-Fi until you manually change your drivers. But for most other things, like a video card, that sort of thing, or let's say you've got a TV card in your machine, the live CD will generally let you do your testing and verify that it's going to work with what you've got. Now, when it comes to a graphics card, if you change the driver for your graphics card after you're done installing, you will want to know what the text-based commands are for undoing that and rolling back to the previous graphics driver. Because if you change the graphics driver using the graphics tool and you don't know that command, when you reboot, you may end up with no graphics, just text. So that's the only way you're going to be able to revert that change is if you know that text command. So that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to graphics card drivers. So it comes down to, how do you partition your hard drive? This is where things can get scary. Well, not really, but it can be challenging for some people. So what is a partition? It is simply a division of your hard drive. Just think of Stark from Farscape. Your side, my side, your side, my side. Basically, you are labeling a chunk of the hard drive space to be used for a specific purpose. So, you might have a section to hold your boot information in, although that's not required, a section to use for swapping memory for the hard drive, a section for Windows if you're going to keep Windows, a section for Linux, and a section for holding docs, pics, etc. called Home. Now, Home, again, is where your user accounts folder will be created. And that will contain things like your music files, your movie files, your pictures, your text documents, your save games, etc. Now, you can do this partitioning in Windows with the Windows partitioning tool if you prefer. It doesn't really matter. And this is best when you're shrinking Windows, because Windows can have a RAID set up or it can have spanning of multiple hard drives. And sometimes Windows itself needs to be shut down while you're holding the Shift key to make it completely release a lock that is holding on the hard drive when you want to repartition it. So sometimes going into Linux and then into gparted and trying to repartition your Windows drive won't work because Windows is locking it, or it's spanning multiple hard drives. Now, gparted, the Linux tool for doing this sort of thing, it can completely wipe out a Windows partition, no problem. But if you're trying to shrink it and it's locked, you have to go back into Windows to either unlock it and then use gparted, or just simply shrink it in Windows. Now, you could use gparted to label partitions home, or slash, which is the Linux OS, or boot, where grub2 will go, or swap for your swap space. And there are multiple file system types available: FAT32, NTFS, ext2, 3, 4, and more. And there are dozens of videos on YouTube on how to use gparted, and there's tons of information on which format to use. If you want to know what the difference between ext2 is, ext4, etc., you can look that sort of stuff up. Now, you might be asking why I'm mentioning gparted. Doesn't the installer repartition? Well, yes it does, but it may not have the options that you want. There's usually a manual option for that is essentially gparted, but sometimes it's a different version of gparted or a different look to the GUI, and it may have fewer options for doing the partitioning than gparted itself may have. It varies from distro to distro, but the manual option will often let you share space with Windows by moving a slider bar to designate one side for Windows and one side for Linux, but it may not give you other options, for instance, like making home a separate partition or creating a separate boot partition, that sort of thing. So running gparted first to do your partitioning and then going into your installer and running the install to install Linux is often easier because you can designate exactly what you want the size of the partitions to be and what they're going to be for, kind of thing. Now, other installers may have the take over the whole disk or simply manual. Like I said, it varies from distribution to distribution. Now, if there is a hard drive in the machine that you absolutely do not want touched by the install process, you should shut down your computer and unplug the power cable to that particular hard drive. Now, in gparted, if a menu item is grayed out, it means that that particular item is mounted, and in order to make changes to it, you must unmount it. And that can be done by simply right-clicking and telling it to unmount. And you can also, for instance, go into something called disks. And inside disks, you just simply highlight the particular partition or hard drive. You can mount it, or if it is mounted, you can click on it to unmount it with a simple click. Or you can actually go into the file manager, and in the file manager you can right click and unmount a particular drive. Now, the most often thing that you will have to unmount is the swap space itself, because when you boot into the live CD, in order to run the software on it, it enables swap. So that's one thing you'll most definitely probably have to unmount is swap. Now, the labeling of the hard drives in Windows is different than in gparted, or Linux for that matter. In Windows, it's IDE 0, IDE 1, IDE 2, or hard drive 0, hard drive 1. In Linux, the nomenclature is SDA, SDB for various partitions or drives, and the partitions on those drives are 1, 2, 3. So it'll be SDA1, SDA2, SDA3, etc. So after you've decided on how to partition, then you need to decide if you're going to use the Windows tool or the Live CD automatic tool in order to do all that partitioning. And one of the neat things about the Linux installer is that as you're installing on your system, you can still use the software on the live CD to do stuff like browsing the internet. Now, if you are repartitioning your drive after you've already had everything installed, so for instance, let's say you had set up a dual boot, and then a few years later you come along and you want to remove Windows and go pure Linux, by changing the partitions or deleting partitions or changing the size of partitions, you will likely have to reinstall grub. So there's a link here that you can look at for how to fix grub. And there's also another link just above that here if you want to type all that in, which kind of explains why a boot partition is important if you're using very large hard drives. And it gives you a little story about a system administrator who actually had to manually create grub because somehow the grub options were wiped out and there wasn't a boot partition, so he didn't know where to look for it, so he had to do a bunch of searching and then rebuild. And that link will walk you through his story. Okay, so we're pretty much done here. There's one last thing I'll mention, and that is if you are making a network of all Linux machines and you need to use printers, it's a little bit different than in Windows. So when Windows shares printers, it's kind of obvious, but when Linux does it, it does it a slightly different way. If you're using a Windows machine that has a printer attached and you're using a Linux machine that wants to use that printer, you can easily share that printer just in a similar way that you do inside Windows. But if you are using purely all Linux machines, then printers are handled a little differently. You need to go into a web browser and type in this IP address, 127.0.0.1:631, and this pulls up something called cups. This can also be localhost :631/admin. Now, of course, this has to be installed on your system before you can actually use it. And with most distributions, it is there, but if it isn't, you can actually very simply install it. So it's sudo apt install cups. And of course, here is a documentation page for how to set all that up. So it's help.ubuntu.com/ I believe that is LTS instead of ITS, server guide cups.html. Don't you love it when a font is used that doesn't distinguish between an I and an L? Yep, it is an L. Confirmed, it is an L. So there you go. This video took you through how to migrate from Windows to Linux, going through the backup, selecting the distribution, downloading it, testing it, installing the new OS, configuring it, and selecting and installing the software, and even touched on printers. So, have fun trying out Linux. And welcome to the Penguin people for all those Windows refugees out there.